Evidence before the Royal Commission on Indian Currency and Finance, Part 3. Possibly a certain confusion may be introduced by the analysis of convertibility into internal and external convertibility. What is essential, it is not, in a sound system of currency, now that gold is to be once more apparently accepted as the world's international payment, is that the unit of internal currency should be stable related to a definite gold value. I do not quite accept that. It may be stable for international purposes, it might not be stable for internal purposes. I do not think I managed to make my question quite clear. I understand what is desired by you in your recommendations is that the unit of currency which is used internally should be stable related to a gold value. I am really more for the use of gold. I am opposed to any kind of system which will economize gold under the present circumstances because I think that economy of gold is incompatible with security of price. My standpoint is very different from the standpoint of other people. I may be a little barbarous in my view. Not at all. Let us examine what your real idea is. What is your ideal to be attained in the organization of the currency of a country? It is not that the internal unit should be stable in relation to gold. Oh, yes, it should be stable, not in relation to gold, but stable in terms of commodities. By what methods do you recommend that India's internal currency should be stabilized, that is, in relation to what, and secondly, by what methods? It should be stabilized more in relation to commodities rather than to gold, which is used only for purposes of internal trade. And I say it should be done by stopping the coinage of rupees altogether and prescribing the use of gold. If we reject gold as a standard of reference for the internal currency, what other standard of reference are we to adopt? That I have given here. That we should either go to the compensating standard of Professor Fisher or to the tabular standard of Professor Jevons. If you do not want to use gold and economize gold, then my submission is that you should go to one or the other of those two. I am not sure that I am very intimately acquainted with Professor Fisher's standard, but are these both the same sort of proposals? They are both very much the same except that Professor Fisher's compensating standard, they are really what I should say, I mean the two sides of the same medal, so to say. Professor Fisher would, for instance, alter the metal in the gold unit according to a certain index number, and Professor Jevons would allow more units to be given or less units to be given according to a certain index number. But I think those two are too complicated. I personally believe that the gold standard for all practical purposes is sufficient. Returning to what is practically possible, you are of the opinion that the value of India's currency unit should be determined in reference to a certain quantity of gold. No, my submission is that India should have gold in currency. Gold should not only act as a unit of reference. Let me pass from that and ask you another question. Let me now deal with the view which you advance, which I understand is best expressed in paragraph 4 of your memorandum, subparagraph 2, where you say the whole world is suffering from a continuous rise of prices owing to a depreciation of gold. Anything, therefore, that will tend to appreciate gold will be to the good, and if gold is to appreciate, there must be a larger use of gold as a currency. If I understand the precise force of that opinion, it is that the gold exchange standard tends to economize the use of gold, and that what is prudent and advisable is not that the use of gold should be economized, and therefore that the gold exchange standard is bad. Yes, and that is based upon the view which you take as to the future relation between the demand and supply of gold in the world. Yes, you are of the opinion that the future supply of gold is likely to grow in relation to the demand. No, not grow. It will remain large because other people are not using gold. They are using paper. They are not in a position to use gold. So, gold, even if it is not used, will remain large in quantity. First of all, a preliminary question in regard to that. Are you considering here the interests of India, or are you considering the service which India might render to the rest of the world? I have both in view. You think that by doing that, India will be serving her own interests and the interests of the rest of the world at the same time. Do you agree with the not uncommonly held opinion that the gold currency is an expensive system? Yes, it is. So that we have to consider in the first place the possible disadvantage to India of the expense involved. What are the advantages to India to set against that expense? It is that you have a more stable standard, which, as Professor Cannan says, is knave proof and fool proof. Now, as regards the prospect, the force of this contention would depend, would it not, upon the realization of your anticipations as regard the supply of gold in the world at large? Yes. Would you agree that supposing on the one hand there was to be a relative decrease in the world's gold supply, such as might tend to a general rise in world prices, that then it would be to the advantage of India as of other countries to economize in the use of gold? Well, my reply is that we need not be afraid of an indefinite contraction. We have always got methods for increasing currency. We must guard against indefinite expansion, which is always possible. If you have pegged the Indian currency definitely to gold through the gold standard and there is a relative diminution in the world's gold supplies, then any general fall in prices which might result would make itself felt in India also. Yes, but that could be guarded against by increasing a paper currency or otherwise by manipulating the paper currency. Is not that sacrifice very characteristic of the gold currency system for which you yourself have selected that system? No, I am not making gold a currency simply because I want to avoid the possibilities of an indefinite expansion. As I say, you can always guard against an indefinite contraction. Falling prices can always be prevented. Now let me ask you a question as to the opinion you have formed that anything that would tend to appreciate gold would be to the future, would be to the good. Have you been able to arrive to any statistical estimates as to what the future of the relation between the supply and demand of gold will be in the course of 10 years to come? Well, in my investigations, I did some of them in 1993 when I was writing the book. I had occasion to read some articles which appeared in the Harvard Business Barometer series, and I rather get the impression that there was no likelihood of any fall in the production of gold. And besides, my point is this that the countries of the world are using so much paper that whatever gold supply we have is really very large. Those countries, therefore, that can avoid economizing gold might as well do it to their own benefit and to the benefit of the rest of the world. The end.